Welcome to The Happy Writer, a show about creating and sustaining a long-term author career. My name is Patty Jansen, writer of science fiction and fantasy. I've published independently since 2011. This show covers motivation, diversification, learning new skills, and your place in your career. Come on in and be happy. In episode 59 of The Happy Writer, I'm going to talk about the writer's relationship with words. You might go, hang on, we are writers. Words are the tools of our trade, and you would be right. But our relationship with words can become strained and fraught with anxiety, and sometimes this relationship can become quite unhealthy. It can actually be possible to worry too much about words. There is this joke meme going around on the internet that I've seen a few times on different platforms. It shows a bunch of wooden cubes with letters on them from a child's toy set, and with it goes the text, "I went to IKEA and got a book." There are also jokes about sending publishers a dictionary and letting them figure out what order the words need to be in. As writers, we use words, but choosing words is not always easy. Every time we sit down to write, we make decisions about words. Which words to use, how many of them to use, do we use big words or small words, and how do we put those words together? Do we use long sentences or short sentences? Are our descriptions flowery or are they minimalistic? I've seen a number of ways in which the writer's relationship with words can go off the rails. I just thought it would be a fun topic to talk about for an episode. For one, I have never heard anyone else talk about this much before. When we first start writing, we simply barf words onto a page, the words that are in our brains, the words we like to use to communicate, words that may need to be edited and may need to have repetitive ticks beaten out of them, words that you may later realize are part of a regional vernacular that people worldwide won't always understand. The types of words you use are probably going to be colored by your location, your level of education, your profession, and the last couple of books you read. If you haven't been reading any books recently, that might be a problem, because in that case, the words might be influenced by the last legal report you read for your job, and straight up, I hope you can see that might be a problem. Then, after a while, you figure out that you had better learn how to do this writing lark. And then you either enroll in some creative writing courses or you pick up one or more of the excellent books on the subject. But, oh dear, those courses and books impress upon you that the words you use must be good words. They must not be cliché words. They must not be overused words. They must be the right words for your genre, and they must be meaningful. We get scolded about all the different types of ways writers make mistakes, and many examples are given about how writers tell instead of show and what to do about it. Aspiring writers even get given lists of words that they should not use and told to rid their manuscript of those bad words. They get told to use interesting verbs and to avoid certain sentence structures like passive voice altogether. And all of a sudden there are so many rules that it becomes overwhelming, and you might be forgiven for becoming hesitant about writing down any words at all, lest they be the wrong ones. Basically, at this level of writing, the focus is all on the individual words within the sentence, and the meaning of the sentence is kind of secondary to this purpose. It's a useful exercise, but don't read too much into it. I would never discourage people from reading books that discuss sentence-level writing or attending a workshop or two on this subject, because there is good stuff to be learned in amongst all these weeds. Your sentences are easier when they are varied, when you don't use the same word over and over again, when you strip them of a good amount of filler language that you don't actually need. There are certain words that really should be used sparingly, and it is possible to slow a sentence with too many adverbs. You really do need to learn this kind of stuff, and the reasons that drive this type of instruction. But there is another saying going around in the writer community, and that is that you should learn about this stuff, and then you should forget it. And I think this is a bit confusing because you shouldn't really forget it, but you should internalize the knowledge and not worry too much about it afterwards. Because worrying too much about it stifles your writing process. Worrying too much about this stuff creates twisted, unnatural sentences that are hard to understand. By way of exercise, grab a chapter in your current work in progress and get rid of every instance of the word that. Then give it to your editor. You will find that invariably they will put half of them back in, not because the word that is awesome, but because the sentence sometimes just reads easier with it. When leaving a word out, it makes the reader stop and go back to past the sentence. You have lost that reader. More than anything else, words need to sound natural. Words need to get out of the way. They need to convey meaning, not draw attention to themselves by creating tortured sentences that readers have to stop to read twice to figure out what they mean. I think people often misunderstand what good writers, even good literary writers, whose prose is praised, do to create this effect. They say literary writers need to use big words. No, they don't need to use big words. With each big word, their fiction becomes a step harder to read. It is true that even fiction sometimes has the function of teaching readers the meaning of words. This is great and fine. But if you want a decent number of people to actually read your book, you better make sure that readers don't have to look up too many words or make the meaning clear from the context. Writers in all genres need to use special words and jargon sparingly. Jargon needs to be supported by the surrounding text. Jargon may be necessary. If your character is a boat builder, you better make sure you're familiar with the boat terminology. Use these words sparingly and make sure the reader can figure out roughly what a term means without having to consult the dictionary. You'll add jargon for two main reasons. One, to describe the thing in question. In this case, it needs to be clear from the text precisely what the word means. Or two, to add flavour. In this case, it suffices for the reader to understand that the word in question is a thing that's necessary for a sail to operate. You don't need to explain what it does precisely. Less really is more. Fewer of these words leave the impact of the individual word greater. This is a rule that always applies. Less is always better. Allow people to fully grasp the meaning of a word before you spring the next word on them. I'll take things a step further. What about a scientific paper? A paper on a non-fiction subject should cover enough jargon to convey the meaning, but to the people who are interested in the subject, the jargon will read easily because the readers are familiar with it. It's not about jargon. It's about words readers may not know. Jargon is a language. Those interested in the subject already know it. But use it only where it's necessary. It's amazing how much additional jargon-like words will suppress the number of times a scientific paper is cited. It always pays to be clear about your meaning and not to obfuscate it under a word salad. Most academic and technical literature is just terribly, terribly written. Legal documents are written the way they are to a certain legal formula, not for readability. When you want people to read your stuff, your words need to be clear. You want to avoid using imprecise language. You want your language to sound natural. You don't want it to sound like a technical document. Being clear is a skill that you need to learn. There is a literary fiction writer in Australia whose fiction I very much enjoy. His name is Tim Winton, and he paints the most beautiful pictures of scenes and people with words. Does he use long and convoluted words? No, not at all. He is very much an everyday person who just happens to write literary fiction, but he uses everyday words. It is at the scene level where the magic happens. It's the way he describes things using only ordinary words. The magic is not in the words themselves, but it is in the way he puts them together in a paragraph and in the way the paragraphs form a chapter. Another way I have seen writers get themselves into problems with words is with strict adherence to word count. Some people find it useful at some point in their writing to set themselves daily word counts to produce the stuff. The problem comes afterwards. After you've made your target word count and you go through a chapter and realize it's absolute garbage, you need to have the strength to recognize that some of the words you wrote in a big word vomit are just not cutting the mustard. If you work with daily word count targets, you have to be prepared that on some days you sit down to write and you produce little more than garbage. You need to have the strength to actually get rid of the garbage. When I am in this phase of my writing, I usually dictate a chapter every day, because dictated words are cheap, because I literally speak them into my phone while I'm on a walk. I don't have much trouble deleting the chapter and then trying again the next day when I've actually figured out what needs to happen. Of course, you can figure this out beforehand, and that helps greatly. But it happens not infrequently that you realize something should happen earlier in the book, or that you realize that you let the characters sit down for a discussion of stuff that you need to cover in a different place in a different way, or that it's plainly not necessary. Trying to adhere to strict word counts makes you feel pressured about words. If words represent progress, then you may be very reluctant to delete them, and you might make attempts to save them, while deleting them would be the best way forward. But instead you try to massage the words to make sure that they can stay in your manuscript and hold up their part of the word count. To be honest, that is unlikely to be helpful. So much so that I have simply abandoned word count targets. If I go to dictate a chapter, I will make a few notes about what needs to happen in the chapter, and then I just let the words flow as they happen. Sometimes I will find that the subject can be expanded into 2 chapters, but sometimes I find that the subject is actually not that interesting, and I'm done after 500 words. In that case, I merge the chapter with the previous or the next one. The point is this: the words you need to put on the page have to be the ones that move the plot forward. Word count targets may make you susceptible to putting words on the page for the sake of making your daily word count. If this is the case, then be prepared to delete the crap ones later, or simply abandon strict adherence to word counts. So there you go. These are some of the unhelpful relationships writers can have with words. Ultimately, words are only a means of communication. The words themselves shouldn't really matter too much. They should do their job. They shouldn't draw too much attention to themselves. They should feel natural and be easy to read. And they shouldn't be padding out the total word count. In the next episode, I will talk about links to your books, where you can put them, and ways to deal with links to an increasingly large and complex catalogue. Thank you for listening to the Happy Writer Show. Check out links and information about other episodes on my website at pattyjansen.com, where you can also find out about my books. You can support me by subscribing to the show or on Patreon at patreon.com/pattyjansen.